I want you to hold like your hand right now. Like really look at it. Keep one hand on the wheel if you're driving, obviously, but otherwise just look at your hand.
Yeah, try to imagine doing something simple like picking up your keys or tying your shoe, but without your thumb.
Right. You literally can't. And that specific like offset angle of your thumb and the fact that it operates on exactly 2 joints while your other fingers have 3, it's effectively the physical fulcrum for all of human civilization.
Absolutely. Without that exact geometric blueprint, we just don't build cities. We don't forge tools.
Exactly. And, why is your middle finger the longest? What if we just added like 1 extra knuckle to it so it was 2 centimeters longer? Today's source text argues that if you made that one tiny alteration, it wouldn't just make your hand clumsy.
No, it would be a total collapse.
Yeah, it would signify the unraveling of the mathematical laws that literally hold the universe together. So today we are diving into a text by Shufeng, and it's titled, There is a Supernatural Soul in the Universe.
Right, and specifically we're anchoring this deep dive in chapter 16, which is called Golden Mean Perfect Proportion. And,
Yeah,
it is a text that really demands you completely shift your paradigm.
totally.
The author's central argument here is massive. He's saying the mathematical harmony in those perfect proportions we see in nature, they aren't byproducts of random mutation. They are absolute, quantifiable proof of what he calls a greatest creator.
It's a huge argument, and it starts with the physical world, the stuff you can touch, and scales all the way up to quantum mechanics. But we're going to start where the author starts, which is with a walk through a marine products market in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Yeah, he's looking at these conch shells, specifically the spiraling structure of a whelk.
Right.
And he realizes that this tiny, completely brainless sea creature has produced this geometric spiral that, it completely dwarfs the structural integrity and aesthetic perfection of the best human architects.
He actually poses this really provocative question right out of the gate. He says, is the brain of a shell creature more advanced than that of a man?
Yeah, it's a great hook. And he carries that exact observation from the ocean straight into the plant kingdom. He looks at sunflowers.
Oh, the sunflowers. This part is wild.
Right, because if you look at the center disk of a sunflower, the seeds form these perfectly uncrowded spiral arrays. They spiral leftward and rightward at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how many seeds are packed into that disk, they never crowd each other out. They fit with absolute, flawless geometric perfection.
I actually have to admit, I chuckled a bit when the author wrote that he figured the ancestors of sunflowers must have obtained PhDs in mathematics.
It's a funny image, for sure.
It is, because otherwise, how could a plant possibly engineer such a flawless sequence for its offspring? But it really highlights a gap in how we usually talk about biology. We just shrug and say, well, that's just evolution.
Right, but a tool requires a blueprint.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the hand is like a perfectly calibrated multi-tool. If you change one tiny specification, the whole tool becomes clumsy and just fails. But I have to ask, is this just biology to the author, or does he think this is a highly intentional blueprint?
What's fascinating here is that the author completely rejects the idea that these proportions are governed from the bottom up.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning he doesn't believe the organism itself or random environmental pressures are the driving force. He argues that this perfection is, quote, predestined by heaven.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, in his framework, natural selection just fails to account for the overarching mathematical strictness of the entire system. Because he goes back to human anatomy. He notes that the little finger's 3 knuckles exactly equal the length of the ring finger's 2 lower knuckles.
It is so specific.
It is. And he points out that the average human height has basically hovered around 1.73 meters for thousands of years. He lists out all these contrasts, why mice have small eyes while horses have large ones, why grass doesn't grow into towering trees.
Even human reproductive organs, right? He mentions they're proportionally matched.
Exactly. He's arguing there is an active, mysterious, non-physical power controlling the developmental direction of every single organism. It's not trial and error. It's a deliberate blueprint from a greatest creator.
So he's pointing out all these perfectly balanced equations in nature. But I kind of want to push back on this a bit, just from a standard science view. A biologist would look at the mouse's eyes and say, well, that's purely environmental adaptation.
Of course.
Like, natural selection over millions of years perfectly tuned those eyes to survival needs. So does the author think natural selection is just a total myth?
He's arguing that natural selection is, at best, a secondary effect. The exquisite proportions are the primary rule. They are a mathematical blueprint reflecting absolute wisdom.
Okay, so if the biological world, like the hand, the sunflower, the concha, if that's the physical building, then mathematics is the architectural blueprint itself.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And if this isn't just natural selection, we have to look at the language that blueprint is written in,
Mhm.
which is where the text moves from biology into pure math. And he starts with pi.
Right, pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. It's a number that is endless and enigmatic. It never resolves. It never repeats.
Everyone knows pi from high school math, but he takes it further.
He does. For the author, pi is way more than just a tool to measure a tire or a coin. It represents the realization that the material world contains endless mysteries. It reflects the boundless, infinitely informative wisdom of the Creator.
But pi is at least measuring a real physical shape, you know? You can physically draw a circle.
True.
But then the author takes this hard pivot into imaginary numbers. Specifically, the imaginary number I, which is the square root of -1.
This is where the math really challenges our intuition.
Right, because mathematically, this defies physical reality. Basic multiplication rules say a positive times a positive is positive, and a negative times a negative is also a positive. So physically, it is impossible for any number multiplied by itself to result in a negative. The square root of -1 simply shouldn't exist.
It doesn't exist in the physical realm.
Yeah.
I mean, if I ask you to hand me the square root of -1 apples, you can't do it.
I'd look at you like you were crazy.
Exactly. And yet the author points out that this seemingly illusory number is the fundamental bedrock of our most advanced physics.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he highlights the historical shift from classical physics, where Einstein believed the universe was orderly and totally predictable, to the bizarre world of quantum mechanics.
Right? Quantum mechanics introduced fundamental uncertainty. You literally cannot accurately measure a particle's position and its speed at the exact same time.
The closer you look at one, the blurrier the other gets.
Exactly. And because of that inherent blurriness, physicists can't use standard math to pinpoint an electron. They have to use a wave function.
Let's actually unpack that, because wave function sounds like some really heavy jargon.
Yeah, it can be intimidating.
Basically, a wave function is a probability cloud. It's a mathematical description of all the places a particle might be and all the states it might be in. And these particles, they act like waves that can crash into each other or even cancel each other out like ripples in a pond.
Precisely. And to map how these quantum waves interfere with each other, you have to track their phase, like where the peaks and troughs of the waves are at any given moment.
And you can't do that with normal numbers.
No, you cannot calculate those shifting phases using standard real numbers. You require a mathematical space that can rotate. That is the complex plane.
And without imaginary numbers, there is no complex plane.
Right. You cannot have a complex plane without complex numbers.
Yeah.
And you can't have those without imaginary numbers like the square root of -1. The illusory is literally required to calculate the real.
It reminds me of drawing a 3D building on a flat piece of paper. Like the paper only has 2 dimensions up, down, and left, right. If you want to draw a realistic house, you have to use perspective to imply a z-axis like depth. You can't actually see physical depth on that flat piece of paper, but without the mathematical concept of depth, your drawing of the house completely collapses.
That is a perfect analogy.
So imaginary numbers are like the invisible background color that makes the visible game world function. They're the mathematical depth of reality.
And the author uses this to corner the reader philosophically. He's saying, if the very foundation of physical reality, the quantum behavior of the atoms that make up your hand, or the sunflower, if that absolutely requires non-physical imaginary numbers to function.
Then reality itself is fundamentally non-physical.
Exactly. The author concludes that this proves there is a non-material spiritual world existing right alongside the physical one. The illusory power is actually the decisive factor governing reality.
Hold on, though. I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Just because a mathematical model requires abstract concepts to balance an equation, does that actually prove a spiritual realm? Or does it just prove that human mathematics is an incredibly complex tool that sometimes requires, creative workarounds to map things we can't see?
It's a crucial distinction. From a purely secular scientific standpoint, math is just a descriptive tool. But within the logic of this text, the math isn't just describing reality, It is generating it.
Oh, I see.
The author asserts that because the math precedes the physical matter, the non-physical realm must be the primary realm.
And he ties this back to how we experience life and time. This is wild. He introduces this concept of linear time versus lateral time.
Yes.
He says our physical bodies, like our flesh, are trapped in linear time, past to present to future. It's just a straight line from birth to death.
But the spiritual entity, the soul, exists in that complex non-physical plane we just talked about. Therefore, it experiences lateral time.
Which means what?
Because the spirit isn't confined to the physical body. It can depart that straight line at any given moment and move laterally.
I was really trying to wrap my head around his geometric explanation for this, because he uses graphing.
He does, yeah.
Like if you map a normal function using real numbers, you get a graph with 4 squares or 4 quadrants that represents the material world. But he says a complex function has 16 quadrants. How does 4 suddenly become 16 just by adding imaginary numbers?
Comes down to dimensionality. A standard graph has an x-axis and a y-axis, right? That's a 2D space which divides into 4 quadrants.
Yeah, standard high school algebra.
Right. But when you're dealing with complex numbers, your x value is no longer just a single point on a line. It is an entire 2D complex plane of its own. And your a value is also an entire 2D complex plane.
Whoa, okay.
So you're mapping a 2D space onto another 2D space. That creates a 4-dimensional mathematical space. And in 4D geometry, instead of 4 quadrants, space is divided into 16 orthants, which is what the author calls the 16 quadrants.
So the math expands reality from 4 rooms into 16 rooms, basically.
Yes. And he uses this absolute mathematical reality to pose a really heavy existential question. He asks, which quadrant is my life in at present?
Meaning we're stuck in the 4 physical ones, blind to the rest.
Exactly. He's challenging you to realize that you are only perceiving a tiny fraction of the mathematical reality around you because you're locked into those linear physical quadrants.
Okay, we've gone super deep into the invisible math governing quantum mechanics and spiritual dimensions, but the text doesn't leave us stranded in the abstract.
No, it brings it all back down to earth.
Right. It brings these complex blueprints back to something we all experience instantly and intuitively: beauty. So the deep dive shifts here from quantum physics to aesthetics, introducing the golden mean.
Also known as phi. The author introduces the famous Fibonacci array, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on.
Right, where every number is simply the sum of the previous 2 numbers. So what does this all mean? The magic of this sequence happens when you start dividing one of those numbers by the number immediately preceding it.
Right.
Like if you divide 13 by 8, you get 1.625. If you divide 21 by 13, you get 1.615. And as you go higher and higher in that sequence, the result eventually settles on this never-ending number, 1.6180339. That is the golden mean.
And the author states that this exact ratio is the literal formula for beauty. He brings it back to the human proportions you were examining at the start.
The 1.73 meters thing.
Yeah. He claims that if you measure a person's overall height and find the ratio between that and the distance from their soul to their navel, and if that ratio equals the ratio of the soul to navel distance compared to the navel to top of head distance, you will find the golden mean.
It's fascinating because he argues this is the mathematical reason why things please the eye.
It's universally applied.
Right. It's why that conch shell in the Tanzanian market looks incomparably beautiful. It's why flowers draw us in. It's why certain musical chords sound rich and melodious, and why walking into certain architectural spaces immediately makes your blood pressure drop and makes you feel comfortable.
They all mathematically approximate this 1.618 ratio.
But why does our brain actually care about 1.618?
Well, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, our visual cortex processes information by looking for patterns. The golden ratio is a fractal scaling ratio.
Meaning it repeats itself efficiently.
Exactly. It allows an organism, like a plant, to grow without changing its fundamental shape. Because it is so highly efficient, biological symmetry heavily relies on it.
Ah, so we're wired for it.
Yes, when our brains see that specific ratio, we are subconsciously recognizing biological efficiency, health, and structural integrity. It's just cognitively easier for our brains to process.
We are hardwired to love good math. The author synthesizes this into a very clear, defining statement. He says, appropriate proportional array is beauty.
The design of the greatest creator isn't just functional. It is fundamentally aesthetic.
And to prove how deeply ingrained this math is in our perception, he asks you to imagine the opposite. He uses this bizarre visual. He says, Will you think it is beautiful if a person has the neck of a giraffe, the eyes of a mouse, or arms longer than those of an ape?
It's such a jarring visual,
Mhm.
but it instantly highlights how uncomfortable disproportion is.
Right.
When the math is wrong, our brains immediately sound an alarm.
Which perfectly transitions us into the final and undoubtedly the most intense section of this text. Because if the golden mean represents perfect harmony and the active will of the creator, we have to look at what happens when that harmony is broken.
And it gets intense.
Yeah, the author's view of disproportion isn't just that it looks ugly. He argues it triggers severe autocorrecting consequences in the real world.
He begins with a very accessible analogy, actually.
Mhm.
Think about judges on a television competition show.
Oh, like gymnastics or something.
Right. When calculating a contestant's final score, judges always cross out the highest score and the lowest score. The author says this happens because extremes are inherently problematic and discordant. He establishes this universal rule. Things always reverse themselves after reaching an extreme.
And he applies this rule aggressively to everything, starting with architecture and human environments.
Right.
The text claims that if you build an 80-meter building in the middle of a neighborhood of 8-meter houses, you have violently destroyed the harmony.
And he gets incredibly specific about the energetic consequences of that.
He really does. He says if villagers all live in low bungalows and one person decides to build a 3-story house on a whim, that person will absolutely suffer bad luck.
Conversely, he says that if you live in a tiny bungalow that is suddenly surrounded by towering high-rises, that disproportionate environment will cause severe depression and will actually stunt the development of your children.
That's a bold claim.
Based on the text's energetic logic, the disproportion creates a mathematical vacuum. It's a disruption in the natural flow, which manifests physically and psychologically in the inhabitants.
And then the author scales this mathematical logic all the way up to global geopolitics and massive tragedies. He writes that for the United States to maintain its position, it must assist impoverished countries proportionally.
Right, maintaining balance.
Yeah, if it exerts excessive force or acts disproportionately, it will, quote, inevitably face punishment from natural laws, and poor countries must strive forward or they will perish.
But this is where the text makes some massive, incredibly controversial leaps.
Yeah, I have to step back here as a reader.
Yeah.
Because he takes this mathematical concept of proportion and applies it to tragic global events, like the destruction of the World Trade Center and the 2003 SARS outbreak. The author is literally equating terrorist attacks and deadly viruses to a mathematical course correction. He writes that while the World Trade Center was seemingly destroyed by terrorists, its destruction was actually tied to its extreme, disproportionate height, violating natural laws.
This raises an important question about how we read this text. It is a staggering assertion. But to impartially unpack this, we have to look at the absolute extreme of his logic.
Right.
In his framework, there is zero room for randomness. Nothing is random. A geopolitical terrorist event, a structural collapse, or a viral outbreak are all treated exactly the same as a math equation resolving itself.
He literally views these tragedies as a balancing of the scales.
Precisely. The text posits a mysterious power of proportion that acts as a ruthless, invisible autocorrect for the universe.
He compares human overpopulation to a rapidly growing branch on a tree.
Yes, the pruning analogy.
If that branch grows completely out of proportion to the rest of the tree, its sheer weight will either snap the branch or uproot the entire tree.
And the author explicitly states that if humans do not control their own population and restore harmony with the surrounding plants and animals, the power of nature will play its role.
And that role is violent.
Very. He lists wars, earthquakes, floods, fires, famines, and plagues as the specific pruning mechanisms nature uses to violently correct disproportion.
Wow.
Yeah. He views the 2003 SARS outbreak not as a random biological mutation, but as a deliberate alarm bell sounded by nature to correct an imbalance.
How does he even sum that up?
He concludes this intense section by stating, proportion is a mysterious power in nature that controls the development and changes of everything in the universe.
So for him, the math is never just descriptive. It is completely prescriptive.
Exactly. It is the active, enforcing will of the greatest creator, maintaining perfect harmony, even if the methods appear devastating to us.
It is a genuinely wild journey this text takes you on. I mean, we started by looking at the spiral of a conch shell in a Tanzanian market and the length of your pinky finger.
Right.
And from there, we dove into the quantum realm, unpacking how the phase of wave functions requires the imaginary square root of -1, mapping out a spiritual 16-quadrant reality.
And then we calculated the formula for beauty using the Fibonacci sequence.
Exactly. And finally, we navigated this intense worldview where a disproportionate building or an imbalanced society triggers an auto-correcting universal pruning.
It is a remarkable synthesis, honestly. It connects evolutionary biology, complex algebra, human aesthetics, and devastating global events under one single unifying theory.
The absolute rule of perfect proportion.
Exactly.
It fundamentally forces you to reconsider the space you take up in the world and how you fit into the geometry around you. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Go ahead.
It goes back to that concept of time the author mentioned earlier. If our physical bodies are trapped marching forward on a straight, inescapable line of linear time, but our spiritual essence exists in a mathematically proven space of lateral time that can depart the physical body at any moment.
Yeah.
What does it actually feel like to move laterally? Not forward into tomorrow, not backward into yesterday, but stepping sideways, like expanding outward into all 16 quadrants of the exact precise moment you're experiencing right now.
That completely dismantles and reframes what it means to truly be present.
It really does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about the rest of your day, look closely at the architecture you walk past.
Look at the spirals of the plants.
And the next time you go to pick up your keys, hold up your hand, and really look at the mechanics of it. You just might see the blueprint. Take care.